But why are we rushing? What are we trying to prove? And in fact, it ends up coming across a lot of the times as a lack of confidence. To tell a story before the person has even heard you speak, you're basically setting the scene. Because if that person is making me feel the type of way, if they are holding my attention, if they are able to elicit certain emotions from me, I want to take note of how they've done that. Hey, what's up? I'm Adam if you're new here, and if you're returning, then you know what's good. Let's talk about consciously improving the way that we move through the world, and that's the way people see us. It's completely normal to want the world to perceive us as eloquent and thoughtful, artistic, attractive. However we see our higher selves, we would like to project that into the world. And I'm kind of over this idea that nobody should care about what anybody thinks about each other. Like, that doesn't really make sense given we're highly social creatures who turn to our peers, our loved ones, right? We rely on our group to move forward and to live a fulfilled life. Now, like most things, we can do too much as humans and then it becomes problematic because all we care about is people's thoughts about us. But I think there is definitely a healthy medium. And in this video, I want to go through the practical steps that we can take in order to change the way that the world perceives us, which is just an extension of the way we see ourselves. So the first thing I actually want to get into is almost a foundational step. And it's accepting that you don't need to show up as your whole self in every situation. And now this may seem kind of like the antithesis, like, aren't we trying to be authentic? Aren't we trying to be all of ourselves all the time? But that doesn't really make sense. The way we want to be perceived in different situations is different. Like how I show up in my corporate job and whether I'm trying to negotiate a higher salary, for example, will be very different to how I show up in my romantic life or with my friends or with my family. And accepting that allows you to free yourself up to tap into the parts of you that make sense for this moment. And the reason I wanted to start with this is because I have struggled with this, I would say actually a lot of my adult life. This idea that yes, I am, say, somebody who prioritizes science and objectivity and intelligence through reading and research. I also am very artistic, right? And whether I'm creating things here on YouTube or whether I'm painting, like, do I need to show up though in all elements and bring all of that to every situation? No. And it's actually surprising how freeing that becomes when you're like, I'm one person, but I have multiple layers to me that I can tap into at different times. And it doesn't mean that you're not being your authentic self or that you're pretending or putting on a facade. It just means that with the situation that you're in right now, it matters how you are perceived, and you want to be perceived in a certain way that is going to progress you and move you towards the life you want, whether, like I said, that's in the career sense or in a romantic sense, and so on. Okay, so that was more of a mindset thing, but it was really important. Let's get into more of the practical steps that you can take. The first thing is about don't rush to respond when you are in a situation with another person or a group. Now, there can be a tendency for us to want to rush in response to things in order to seem like things just roll off the top of our head, right? Like we just have everything at the ready to go as soon as somebody asks us a question or wants our input on something. But why are we rushing? What are we trying to prove? And in fact, it ends up coming across a lot of the times as a lack of confidence, right? Have you ever noticed those very thoughtful people, those people who just take their time and think things over before they say anything? We don't think that person is unintelligent or, slow. We just think that they're taking their time. And I've found this is something that really changes the way that people in the world sees you and also the way you see yourself. You're giving yourself the room to think because this question means something to you, or you would like to be maybe not enlightening, but at least a response that adds value to the situation that you're in. And it's funny because I started to find myself speaking very quickly in my YouTube videos, and it was impacting actually my articulation and my words, like the way I was saying things and the mistakes I was making. And in part, I think it's because of the TikTok culture and making TikToks, but I was like, I don't want to be received like this, and I don't like watching that back in such a fast pace. Like, what am I rushing for? I want us to have a conversation or at least a dialogue about these ideas and these really important things that impact our lives. I want to be perceived in a certain way, and I want to believe that I'm a certain type of person. And if you're still not convinced about taking things slower and mulling over things, consider you're in an interview and the person says, "Hey, Sally," or "Hey, Ricky, like, what do you think about this?" Or "Where do you see yourself in the next 3 years?" And you just rush to blurt out an answer, right? You're just like, go, 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 go. Perhaps you're stumbling on your words. Perhaps you're trying to backtrack things, which naturally there's not an issue with rethinking things. But had you just taken some time to pause and been like, that is an interesting question. And if I was considering all things, pause, and then go through it. Allow your mind to really think this through. The mind can work pretty fast, but you need to give it some room. Suddenly you come across as far more confident. I don't feel like I have to rush to answer your question necessarily. I value your time, but I also value what you have asked me. And that's a very simple change you can make, but it will impact the way that you are perceived in terms of confidence. You're not somebody who's rushing. you're taking your time, and you understand your value. The next thing I want to talk about is thinking about the story we tell through our appearance. The way that we look is honestly like a cheat code, right? People make decisions about you before you've even opened your mouth. So you can use your appearance, everything from your hair, your makeup, the outfits that you're wearing, your accessories, to tell a story before the person has even heard you speak. You're basically setting the scene. Again, the way we show up in our corporate settings may be different to the way we show up at the art class, which may be different to the way we show up on a date, right? Like the way that we look and the story that we are trying to convey and the feelings we are trying to elicit from the other person will be different. This is kind of another thing I've heard in passing, that looks don't matter and you should be able to show up however you want in the world. It sounds lovely in theory, but there's a reason why humans value visual stimulation so high. Like there's a reason why our eyes are as complex as they are. Like if you just break down the anatomy of the eye and the things that it relates to and how much energy we spend breaking down images and using images to recall things and make connections, there's a reason. So use the cheat code if you'd like use this feature to your advantage and in changing the way that people see you. I'm not saying you necessarily have to wear a dress everywhere or trousers and a blazer everywhere. Whatever it is that you're trying to achieve though, think carefully about the associations that are made when you wear certain outfits and when you turn up in certain ways, when your hair is done a certain way. And think about if that's going to get you closer to where you want to get in life or if it's going to hinder you. But it actually goes deeper than that, because if we really want to change the way people see us, we also have to work on our external markers of health. Things like skin, like physique, like hair, like vitality. These things signal to other people that we take care of ourselves, we are a healthy human. In part, it relates also to mating and things like that. But these signs of health are there for a reason. There's a reason that we see people who are more attractive often when they have these signs of health. It's biological. So again, why not lean into that? Not only because it will change the way people perceive you, but at the core, it's about how you view yourself. Do you view yourself as somebody who should be taken care of and should be, treated in a healthy way? And therefore other people will see you in the same way. The next thing is actually all about studying the science and the art of communication, whether that be verbal or written communication effectively. And it's because these things are a skill like any other skill. So if I wanted to learn how to code, for example, I would go and seek out information on that. I would do my research. I would try to learn from people who know how to code, right? I would adopt their tactics, the tools that they use. I would make that a part of me. But sometimes when it comes to communication, we put this in a category like either you're born with it or you're not as a skill that can be learned, acquired, developed over time. Communication is such a foundational skill. Like the way you are able to articulate your ideas impacts so many things in your life and ultimately how the world perceives you. Can you communicate your ideas effectively? Can you communicate your feelings effectively in a way that allows the other person to understand where you are coming from and the thoughts that are going on in your head? Over the last few years, I've started doing something that I genuinely think has helped me articulate myself better, especially with written communication, which is something that I am not all that comfortable with compared to, say, video. But I take note of the people that make me feel a type of way. Whether I'm at a tech talk or I'm watching a YouTube video or I'm reading an article or I'm reading a book, I try to note down not just the content that I'm trying to learn from, but how that person is making me feel. Because if that person is making me feel the type of way, if they are holding my attention, if they are able to elicit certain emotions from me, I want to take note of how they've done that. I want to begin to break that down so that I can embed that in my own communication. And the thing is, people have different communication styles. There are some foundational things like structure and clarity that kind of move across the board. But for the most part, you may find that somebody else you're interested in is not the same person I'm interested in learning from. And that's fine. It's about finding the people who make you feel good, who capture your attention, and who are able to convey the message to you and learn from them. It's so funny because this is one of the things I think was holding me back from ever posting on LinkedIn, which is a really powerful place to build a network, a professional network, no matter what you do actually. It's not just if you work in corporate. I see people who run their own businesses, who coach and stuff like that using LinkedIn. But I was very scared of the way that people would perceive me because of my verbal communication versus my written communication. But the more that I read other people's stuff, the more that I studied other people's work, I read books and it's just like, well, if I can understand what people are saying in this sense and how they're making me feel, why can't I lift some of that stuff into my written work in LinkedIn? And it's all a process and I'm still learning and I still want to get better. You see how when you see it more as a skill that can be learned versus this innate quality that people have, you can move forward. And you can change the way that people perceive you in all forms of communication. So the next thing I want to talk about is so simple and yet it's so impactful. And it's about sticking to your word. In this case, I'm going to illustrate it with being punctual, but it goes for whatever you do. If you say you're going to be somewhere or do something, and then you renege on that, you don't do that, it's almost a marker against your name. Whether you know it or not, whether you think it's just a small thing or a big thing, it will change the way people perceive you and your word. So going back to the idea of being punctual, think about how you feel when you have made the effort to be on time somewhere and you've got ready and you've maybe made sacrifices or moved things around to be somewhere and somebody turns up 15, 20, 30, an hour late. Think about the vibe that is already created when that person gets there. That's not to say you necessarily hate the person or in disgust, but it is a signal to you that, wow, I've made the time and valued this situation in a certain way and valued your time in a way that perhaps you haven't valued mine. And I've noticed that this is something a lot of us can struggle with, especially in our non-corporate or non-career related situations. So we seem to understand the value of being on time and so forth when it comes to work and things like that. But we don't always carry that over to our other relationships, right? And our other situations. And even more than that, we can actually start to embed it in our identity. Like I remember a time when I was like, yeah, I'm just the late friend. Like you might have said that to yourself as well, yeah, I'm just always late. And you start to realize that you've created an identity around being late to the point where you've made it okay. You've accepted and justified that you're late because you're just the late person. Identity matters and the way you speak to yourself and matters. And this is why I always keep drawing on atomic habits and this idea of identity creation, because that habit of being late is you recognizing or accepting that my word doesn't really mean as much as I say it does. And that will have an impact on the way people see you. So this is one example of sticking to your word, and it's very actionable. But the idea here is that if you want people to perceive you as somebody who sticks to their word, whose word carries weight, then you have to make it carry weight. You have to execute on the things that you said you would do with the people that you said you would do at those times. And it's a work in progress, I get it, especially when you've identified as a certain person for all these years. But the work can be done. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually about being present and genuinely trying to seek enjoyment and interest out of the interactions you're having. That difference when you are talking to somebody who genuinely feels like they're there in the conversation with you, right? They're in the interaction with you and they want to be there. That whole setting, already the way I perceive that person, how I'm going to interact with them, my interest in them as well, it's all changed now. They're here with me having this conversation, right? Exploring this idea or exploring this situation and this experience with me. People want to be seen and cared about, and they value that quality in other people. It effectively becomes a feedback loop where if I'm showing interest in you, typically you will also want to return that interest in me. And then we can have a situation where we genuinely get more out of it. Think about like when you're ever been with somebody and they're on their phone a lot. This is a real pet peeve for a lot of people. It's like, are we here having a conversation and enjoying this experience together? Or is what's on your phone so much more important that it drives you away from this moment here? And if so, why did you even bother turning up effectively? Like that's just a small way that you can be more present, but it's so impactful because our phones are constantly trying to distract us. That is the aim of these apps. They want your attention, but you need to be giving that attention to the person that you've committed this time to in this particular moment. This is why I really like the book, The War of Art, because the idea of becoming the professional in your other settings makes so much sense. You wouldn't have your phone out in an interview, would you? Because why would you? You don't want to be distracted. You're there trying to achieve something or trying to have an interaction that can lead you to progression, right? Whether it's progressing towards a new job or a raise or more responsibility. But are you not trying to progress your other relationships, whether it be a stronger connection, whether it be learning about them and their likes and dislikes? Are you not really trying to grow with that person as well? Why would you not then afford them that same respect? And that, again, will change the way that they see you. Like, this person genuinely wants to be here with me. And this person is a respectful person. So the final thought that I wanted to get into is about taking notes on what's working and what's not. In the same way we do when we watch other people, other speakers, right, or other interactions. Like, work out when you do certain things and the response that you get is positive. There's no shame in learning from your mistakes or learning from your successes. And again, communication and the way that we are perceived in the world is still an area that we can learn from. So why would we then not take notes and try to reflect on things like that? Again, I think there's such a shame in this idea that, oh, you're just not naturally like that. Oh, what? Every so often you take notes on the way you interact with people, the way you make people feel. Lame. That's kind of mean. And this is just another one of those simple life hacks where if you can note things down, you're more likely to remember them and be able to reflect on them, right? The human mind is phenomenal, but it's not always the best at retaining information about all scenarios. However, if you take the time after you've had an interaction with someone to note things down, whether that be an interview, whether that be a one-on-one situation with a partner, or with a group of friends, right? I'm not saying you have to do it all the time and it becomes a chore like, oh, must go home after, the link up and write down but at the same time, if you're interested in genuinely progressing as somebody who communicates with others and the way that you move through the world, there will be a period or continuous period of learning from the things that you're doing, the changes that you're making, and seeing if things are working or not. If you're genuinely interested in evolving as a person, then why not take notes? And if you find that you don't need to and you remember things, great. If every so often you want to write things down or make a note on like a voice note or something like that, why not do that too? Wow, the sun is just doing so many things today. Like, I both love it, but also screaming at me right now. At the end of the day, I am not suggesting that any of us do things that make us feel uncomfortable or anything like that, or try to, again, pretend to be something we're not. I'm just suggesting that if we want to be perceived in a certain way, and ultimately the way that we see ourselves, then we can use genuine tools and skills and frameworks to achieve that. It's not necessarily just luck or we're born with it. We can cultivate the life that we want. We can cultivate the image that we want to be out there in the world of us. If you enjoyed this, then you might want to check out my video on the Renaissance woman over here or the War of Art over here. See you in the next one.